Well, good afternoon. For those who don't know me online, my name is Nicholas Hopton. I'm the Director General of the Middle East Association. And thank you for joining today for a very timely webinar, Middle East Association webinar on, we've titled it, Israel, Palestine and the Middle East, Shifting Security, Diplomacy and Cooperation. There are so many things happening at the moment in the Middle East, and it's been a very busy weekend, a positive weekend for the most part. You've got an extraordinarily insightful panel who are going to share their thoughts before we offer a moment at the end, 15 minutes or so for some questions, which please post them in the chat, and we will pick them up there as best we can. Forgive me if there are a lot of questions. We probably won't have time today to get to them all, but we'll do our best. Let me just briefly introduce our panelists. You will have seen them already on the advert for the webinar, their full biographies, but Avi Melamed will be starting to the panel discussion. And Avi is a former Israeli intelligence official and very experienced in the region. He's also the founder of Inside the Middle East Intelligence Perspectives, and he's a regular commentator on the media. Niveen Anwar Sanduka is the regional director with the Alliance for Middle East Peace, and she is a civil leader and activist advancing peace building and women's rights in Palestine. She chairs the Jerusalem Center for Women, and she also serves on the executive committee of MENA 2050. And Dr. Claire Spencer, as well as being an advisor to the Middle East Association, is an independent consultant, very experienced in the region and on policy, used to run the Chatham House Middle East and North Africa program, and has also worked a lot with the British Council. And our last speaker will be Dr. Robert Geist-Pentfold. You may have heard him on Radio 4's Today program today. Robert is a lecturer in international security at King's College London, also at Johns Hopkins SIS Europe. And he's recently published a book. Give a plug for your book, Robert. Understanding Terror, Withdrawal, Israeli Occupations and Exits. Very timely, given everything that's going on. So thank you all again for joining. Thank you to our panelists in advance. And I'm going to hold them to time, so there is going to be a bit of time at the end for questions, I hope. So Avi, over to you first to share your thoughts on a momentous few days and where things go next, perhaps.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you for this stage. I will just go straight to my observations, and I would like to offer a couple of observations regarding what I think will be major components or major factors that will play a significant role in shaping the trajectory of the conflict and to a large extent some features of the region when we are looking ahead. And I'm talking about both the short, medium, and long-term range. However, I cannot evaluate at this point what will be the impact of those factors, but nevertheless, I think it's important to bring those factors to the discussion. I would like to start with Israel. Very shortly, two observations. First, we have witnessed a dramatic shift in the Israeli geostrategic security policy. Prior to October 7, it was mostly characterized, roughly speaking, with some exceptions, but it was mostly characterized with self-restraint and containing a growing or existing or potential threats. There were different reasons, very valid reasons for that Israeli policy prior to October 7. That has been totally changed following October 7. Today, Israel is aggressively, proactively, preemptively acting to remove existing or potentially threats. We see that in different arenas. We see that in Lebanon. We see that in Syria. We see that in Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and even remote arenas. If I'll try to sum it up, I will say that before October 7, the Israeli guiding concept was first contemplate and then shoot. Today, it's first shoot and then contemplate. The second thing that I would like to observe regarding Israel is a political shift that I anticipate or think is going to happen following the upcoming elections that are supposed to take place in about a year from now, maybe before. I think that we will witness the end of power of the Israeli national right wing in government. I don't think they will be part of the next Israeli government. I think that we will see the return of what I call major central pragmatic Zionist camp with a much more, I would say, hawkish version that will be reflecting particularly lessening and declining willingness to take risks for peace. That is, of course, following the trauma of October 7. A few words about the Palestinians. 50 years ago, the Arab world actually handed the keys to the ship to the Palestinian people. In the mid-1970s, the PLO was empowered formally by the Arab world to take the lead. 50 years later, what we see today is a very interesting shift. The Arab world is, to a large extent, taking back the leadership, not necessarily out of its own volition, but out of the circumstances, which is, of course, very significant development in many different ways. As I said before, I cannot evaluate at this point what will be the impact, but this is something very significant to notice when we talk about it in the context of the Palestinian. That happens in conjunction of two interesting developments that are directly associated with what I call the domino effect of October 7. One is the weakening of the axis of resistance, the Iranian-backed network of terror and semi-state entities. We are looking at Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and others, Iraqi Shiite militias. And the other interesting development is what we see today is the growing power struggle over the path of the national statehood in the Arab world, particularly in the context of the attempt to neutralize the impact of semi-state players and actors within states in Arab world. Like, for example, we see that in Syria, we see that in Iraq, we see that in Lebanon, of course. We see that, and we'll probably see that more and more in the context of Gaza Strip and the Palestinian systems as well. So this is a very interesting and significant, I would say, process to follow. And I will conclude referring to another interesting and significant player, and this is Western public opinion. It's very clear that Western public opinion became a very, very active player in the whole context, and probably likely going to be as well in the future. I would even say it's very likely that it will increase its role. It's very significant to bring that to the discussion because there is some interesting phenomenon that I would like to indicate in that regard. It's clear today that the Palestinian narratives are more dominant within large parts of the Western public opinion. We saw that obviously during the outcome, during the course of the war and so on. And it's interesting because when I'm looking at the inner Arab discussion, I'm detecting some interesting subtexts and messages around it. On the one hand, obviously, naturally, there is a lot of satisfaction within Palestinians and Arab commentators, basically because the narrative, the Palestinian narrative is clearly dominating, and there is a lot of solidarity and support. But then there is another interesting layer where Arab commentators are expressing concerns with that. The two reasons for that concern. One is that they are saying that they are afraid that the Palestinian will be comfortably numb in the sense that they will be more focused on the PR and gaining support and solidarity rather than really trying to move forward and to try to come with some practical solutions to that will help enhance the situation. And the other thing that is out there in the discussion is that there are Arab commentators that basically are concerned with the fact that maybe some of those narratives that are warmly adopted within some circles in the Western public opinion, in the end of the day, are going to boomerang on the Palestinians. And the best example that I can give you is the issue of the resistance that I mentioned before. We all know that this narrative has been very much romanticized and idealized in Western circles. However, I do need to emphasize that in many circles in Arab world, there is, of course, as you probably know, there is a lot of resentment with this whole story of resistance, particularly following October 7. I would like just to quote a Saudi commentator who said something very accurate and to the point about it. His name is Nawaf al-Tabinawi, and he says recently he wrote an article and he said, the axis of resistance rejects the two-state solution because the survival of the axis depends on the continuation of the conflict. Political resolution strips the Axis weapons of their fabricated sanctity, revealing that their deployment has often been a means of dominance domestically and regionally, rather than a project of liberation. This is a very, very accurate and significant observation that should be internalized in the Western discussion. It is significant because, in the end of the day, there is a need, if the West want to play a much more constructive role for finding solution and helping both Israelis and Palestinians, it has to be much more based upon knowledge and understanding and less about an emotional mindset and emotional narratives. Thank you for the stage, and back to you, Nicholas.
Avi, thank you very much. I think that really interesting quote, and the point you make at the end seems to be incredibly valid, particularly at this moment as hard-headed, clear-sighted choices are required to make a reality and a sustainable peace from the ceasefire and hostage release. I'm going to pass straight over to Naveen to give her perspective. Over to you, Naveen. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this stage, and thank you, Avi, for this introduction as well. So actually, this is the first webinar that I participate in after a ceasefire, and it does feel different. It does feel that we are able to breathe, at least, that there is no longer war, that I hope there is no more people being killed in Gaza, and that the humanitarian aid will get in and the man-made famine and starvation will end. And hopefully the people are going to get the much needed attention, medical attention and equipment that they need. And also the Palestinian prisoners who are in Israeli jails without any kind of a process will also be freed. And I'm very happy that the hostages are back as well. So it's kind of like the mixed feelings of the war is finally over, but also, is this what we wanted as Palestinians as well? Is this the moment that we're going to start talking about a real political process, or is it where we go back to the status quo and we end the war in Gaza and that's it, without actually talking about why did the 7th of October actually appear in the first place? Why did it happen in the first place? And what was happening previously as well? So in that framework, there has been many positive signs that have been taking place as well on the international arena, including the recognition of a Palestinian state, which for the Palestinians, of course, it means a lot that our identity as Palestinians will be recognized, but it's not enough. It's not enough to say recognition and then sign a peace agreement in Sharm el-Sheikh without actually saying what is it going to look like, and what I call myself the recognition plus. So it needs to come with a political process, and it needs to come with a long-term or even with a vision and a goal that we, like the Northern Star. What is the Northern Star that everybody is going to be working towards right now? It's a two-state solution that actually meets the rights of both peoples in self-determination, security, and peace and justice for everybody. And until now, this plan is not clear for us as Palestinians. My deep worry is that we are going back to the status quo. That yes, the war is over, and now we're going back to do business as usual, with more settlers attacks in the West Bank, with more annexation of the West Bank, and all the racism that we are witnessing in East Jerusalem, and all the difficulties that Palestinians are also facing inside of Israel. So how are we going to deal with all of that? It's a whole package. You cannot pick and choose one thing and stop there. So the thing is that we have done at the Alliance for Middle East Peace, we have done statistics, and it only showed us that the Palestinians and Israelis on the ground also support a peace process, given that it comes with certain let's call it come with certain conditions. So, for example, we're talking about 73% of the Israelis. They do support an agreement between the Palestinians and the Israelis, given that this agreement comes with a regional recognition and a regional approach, as well as living side by side with a state of Palestine, given that the security is going to be guaranteed for the Israelis. At the same time, if we're talking to Palestinians, they also support such an agreement with a very high percentage as well. We're talking about 76% of the Palestinians also support an international approach, a multilateral approach to solving and ending the occupation. And it's basically also talks about a regional approach that normalizes the situation. And this approach is going to be more acceptable and desirable by Palestinians if the end goal is a two-state solution with Palestinian sovereignty, of course, over East Jerusalem, West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. Now, the thing is, how is all of that linked? I mean, it seems to be very political. If you talk to people on the ground, it is or might seem somehow disconnected from what the people themselves are thinking and feeling. So how do we bring it back and translate it to the people? And this is the role of civil society, basically. And this is the role that ALMIP is trying to play together with the 180 members that we have. First of all, for the very first time since the 7th of October, we see the international community taking civil society into consideration, and we do offer solutions. It started with the G7 commitment. Afterwards, we saw the Paris Peace Summit in June 2025, where President Macron and the foreign minister, the French foreign minister, also were present, and we delivered a call to action. We also worked on recommendations from civil society on how it is going to look like. What is the roadmap? So civil society actually developed a roadmap on the recommendations on what does a two-state solution look like? How can it hold? How can we use the international humanitarian law? What does peace narratives look like? How does the reconstruction of Gaza look like? And we have developed recommendations under each one of those thematic areas. These recommendations were actually used in the New York Declaration that was produced afterwards in early August 2025. And then afterwards, there was another meeting with civil society at UNGA as well in 2025. And now we are saying, how do we integrate civil society and all of these recommendations, that roadmap, with Mr. President's Trump plan as well? Because if this keeps to be at a very high level, ignoring what the Palestinians and Israelis actually want, it won't be sustainable, because civil society is the glue that holds everything together. And I fully agree with Avi that now it might seem like to be a very emotional moment, hostages are back, the war is over, but right now is the time to be pragmatic and to actually think about future steps of how do we actually start this peace process. And thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very clear and well-argued plea for pragmatism and civil society being given a significant role in now fleshing out the initial top-level agreement. It'd be interesting to explore some of that in due course. Next, though, I'll go to Dr. Claire Spencer for her thoughts.
Thank you very much, Nick. And I'm pleased, actually, I'm coming after Avi and Naveen, because some of what I want to say, fortunately, is consonant with some of what they've already said. And I think my focus, given my background is neither Israeli-Palestinian, but from the think tank world going back, gosh, 30 odd plus years, where I have lived through way too many conferences on Arab-Israeli peace, which, as we've seen, didn't materialize into anything. And I remember sitting, listening to people like Dan Levy, who's still very active on this issue, starting virtually every intervention he made by saying, just as you think things couldn't get any worse in the Middle East, they have. And now we've had these 2 years where absolutely, for all of those who've been involved in this conflict and trying to find ways through it, see it as an absolute nadir. It has been absolutely appalling in terms of the violence on all sides, and the violence of attitudes, the violence online, and the violence, I have to say, also in some of the commentary that we've seen in the Western world and elsewhere over what's going on. And I think that has to be one of our starting points. But coming where I come from, I'm going to focus mostly on what the UK and EU should be doing in responding to, let's pause and acknowledge, a wonderful day for Trump yesterday. He achieved, given what I've said about things always getting worse, suddenly he spent yesterday leapfrogging all the complexities and the details that everyone else is saying now need to be fine-tuned to promise everyone a vision of a united, free trade dominated Middle East, which is a bit ironic given what he's doing with tariffs elsewhere. But I do think he deserves some credit for a vision, because this whole area has been bogged down in the detail, in the concerns of both sides, but it's a non-discussion, except in the ways that I'm pleased to say Naveen and both Avi have discussed, that there are ways now of moving beyond this, and I fully back the idea of civil society being primarily involved in this. But what I want to put forward, and this, when I say for the international community, I am, as I say, talking largely or addressing where I come from, the UK and also the European Union. As we know, the international community, including those who brought about yesterday's breakthrough, are now refreshingly a very mature diplomacy coming out of the Gulf, which is not the case at the beginning of Oslo. Obviously, Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, the usual neighbours and players, all playing very constructive roles. And I think we should bear that in mind, that we do have a new regional configuration where previously the extremes have actually carried the day, and certainly in the conflict the extremes have been dominating things. So I want to put forward some principles, and I think nothing will work in future if you reduce the interest and future of deeply divided polities to the interests of a few. In other words, I think certainly in Western recognition of the right to defense of Israel, for too long Israel was allowed this right to defense with impunity, and the word Israel itself represented the whole of Israel, when in fact we all knew even before the 7th of October there were deep divisions within Israel, and that it was this narrow coalition, which we heard very coherently from some of the hostage lobby in Hostage Square, saying this is all about Bibi delaying things, this is all about him staying in power. And we've heard this narrative for a long time. And I think certainly Western governments, EU, UK, US obviously primarily, hesitated too long to call the bluff on this and say, actually, there are limits. There are limits to what you can do here. And so the architects of the future, I think, have to be different faces. You know, the Palestinians have been betrayed by the extremism of Hamas and the laxities, should we call it that, of the Palestinian Authority and the aging leadership. There needs to be a new generation. I'm pleased to hear that on the Israeli side, that's going to change as well, because I think when you heard the reflections in the Knesset, that is not the group of people who are going to lead people forward. You know, it's well known that this governing coalition is not in favor of what Naveen has been talking about, a two-state solution. And I think it behoves Western governments to look more broadly at a democratized Palestinian polity in future, and also look at Israel as in a broader sense as a democracy, and prioritize in some of their discussions a wider range of voices. You know, you can do all the polling you like about who represents who, but those voices, because both sides are now deeply divided internally as well as between each other, I think there needs to be some emphasis on getting civil society involved in both sides to decide the future of politics, and not just say, these are the elected leaders. I mean, Hamas was elected before most people in Gaza was born. These are the elected leaders. We have to follow what they're saying and make excuses for them. So my second principle really is this business of making excuses. I think I'm not alone in having been completely horrified at the way some of these really, the brutalities of this conflict, this 2-year insurgency battle, zero-sum game, has made the unacceptable acceptable. I think what has become morally acceptable in terms of people justifying the unjustifiable, certainly in terms of civilian casualties, comparing whose atrocities are worse than others, I think what we have to try and do collectively is make what has become morally acceptable, morally unacceptable moving forward. I know people don't like historical analogies, but I was trying to think of how it took 2 world wars for the dominant states of the world to have a moral reset after the Second World War, and part of the reconstruction of Europe, particularly, but the reconstruction of the United Nations after that was a moral reckoning with the inhumanities which had preceded it. And I'm not saying this to be emotional, although I do think, contrary to what Avi has said, a bit of emotion has to come into this. We have to hear the testimonies of people who've suffered, the better to reorient things towards a better solution. Because one conclusion I would have from my years studying the Middle East is if you ignore the brutalization, both of minds and bodies, you know where the results are going. I'm thinking particularly of, and again, the analogies may not be perfect, but what happened in Iraq is this severe and very high death toll at the beginning of shock and awe, and that was led from the outside as much as inside, added to the atrocities of previous years, led consequentially to the rise of ISIS and Islamic State. And unless you incorporate those feelings of rejection, of hurt, of non-representation, of brutalization in some kind of peace process, which does involve emotions, unapologetically, you have to incorporate those, recognize them, and channel them. And I think Trump is trying to do this, saying, look, you can live a better life. If we are bogged down in the past and knowing the history and knowing where this comes from, I can tell you, in all the conferences I sat through for those 30 years, there was always someone saying, oh, but this wrong was done and this wrong was done. You can't rule out people's recognition of these things, but you can try very hard to channel them into something more positive. So my recommendation here would be the truth and reconciliation communities, psychologists even, people, psychiatrists perhaps, need to be involved at
We can't hear you.
set up.
Oh, yeah, you're back again. Yeah, go
Yes,
on.
I'm back again. Sorry, I had an interrupted call. People have to be involved to actually set the tone for how you channel negative feelings and also huge losses. There's not anyone in Gaza hasn't been affected by this. And equally, you could say in Israel, no one's been unaffected by this, even if personally they haven't lost anyone. The shock has been tremendous. And I don't think we should underestimate that by going on to my next principle, which is be careful what you wish for in looking at the detail. I think a lot of what went wrong with the Oslo process was because the diplomatic community and others like us, supportive think tanks, would get involved in processes which were amazingly detailed. One of the things that Chatham House carved out a niche for itself with was what was called the Minster-Lovell process. This was where we focused particularly on how to reincorporate the large numbers, particularly in Jordan, as we know, of Palestinian refugees going right back to the 1947, then 67, and how you actually compensated those who were not going to come back in a two-state solution. The amount of detail of maps of those who were redrawing the lines on the map to secure a Palestinian state, the future of Jerusalem. There are mounds of archives all the way around the universities of the world, including in Canada, the archive for the Minster-Lovell process about refugees, all of which can be brought into play. This has been very, very, very closely examined, this conflict. But all I would say is don't lose sight of the end goal and the emotions and involving a broader set of communities than we ever did before. And I'm drawing some of this from looking at listening to what Hussein Agha, who was one of the early architects of the Oslo peace process, along with Rob Malley, who served alongside two presidents on the US side, have actually concluded from their experience. They've just published a book, which I recommend all should read, where Rob Malley, particularly in a podcast I heard him speaking on, was adamant to say, we're not trying to tell people how to shape things in future. We've had our go and it didn't work. We are reflecting on why it didn't work. And one of these is not including enough people, not implicating people, not getting the buy-in at a very early stage of civil society and regional players into the end goal, and getting tied up too much with details and not understanding the psychology of why, for example, Arafat on the Palestinian side kept saying no. there were domestic reasons why he kept having to say no. If he didn't get the absolute desired end game, he had to say no because he would have been overcome, if you like, by internal dissidents within the Palestinian side. So, I think that's one of the principles. I think we could fall into a trap, all those saying we now need the details. We need to be wary of making sure those details have buy-in before they're actually implemented. And I think even in the short term, how you govern or how you structure the short-term government of Gaza, which does need all the things we're saying, development, security, policing, in the short term, should actually have an eye to how this will colour getting something more representative, more democratic on the Palestinian side, both in the West Bank and Gaza. I know I'm running out of time, so I have a final principle, which is it has to be the next generation to the fore. I'm sorry, the older generation, they've had their 30 years, they've all got their conclusions, their advice can be taken on board, but I don't think anyone from that generation should be leading what is a very much a younger generation focused, certainly on the Palestinian side, given the youth demographic. But you need something a little more creative in a world which can actually respond, as we've seen many doing, to what President Trump has been proposing. I mean, those of us who come from the liberal internationalist school of diplomacy have always expressed our shock at how he behaves and how he hasn't got an eye on the detail. What I will give him credit for yesterday is he saw beyond the here and now. Whatever was said in the Knesset, we know how he's behaved towards Prime Minister Netanyahu, forcing him to apologize to the Qataris. That's the first. Despite that humiliation, and all the kind words they're saying to each other, Trump is very much in the school of we have to move beyond where we are. We've got bogged down. We've had enough. He won't do it himself, but he can be appealed to by the kind of solutions that will come from creative thinkers that actually coalesce with his way of seeing the region. And I have to say, one of the things he proposed, which I often thought of and thought this is very subversive, was how much Iranians, the Bazari Iranians, not the current leadership of Iran, but Iranian society with their trading culture, how much they've got in common with the Israelis. And he actually put that forward and says, why not do a deal with the Iranians? Now, he wasn't talking about the Iranian regime. He was talking about society, business to business. We may not see a way through to that straight away, but if that is the kind of vision the next generation can be encouraged to hold and promote, then I think we have some way out of this. But if we keep going back to the past, who did what, whose fault is what, I don't want to hear anyone else justifying the atrocities done to other human beings in this region. We have to finish with that. We have to accept everyone has suffered from this and move on to something which will benefit everybody. That may sound pie in the sky, that may sound emotional, but I think Trump himself has actually pointed the way, paradoxically. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Three very excellent principles laid out there. And in particular, I'm fascinated by this call for a new generation of leadership. I keep being asked about what I think about Tony Blair coming in some role. And I just can't help feeling this is not the right solution to put a bunch of people who've been working on the file for so long without success, despite their personal qualities, to bring them back in to take control. So I hear what you say about need to shift to a new generation. Our last speaker, and just before I turn to Dr. Robert Geist-Pinfold, may I invite you all to keep the questions coming in the Q&A box. And I've got a couple I'm going to pick up straight after Rob. But Rob, over to you.
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay? Just always good to check. Okay, grand. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. And like Naveen, this is my first webinar or meeting of any kind, actually, since the ceasefire took place. Some things never change, though. And I'm glad that I didn't write my speech too far in advance, because I've learned the lessons the hard way in the last 2 years, how everything changes so quickly. However, at least in this case, it is tentative good news. So let's hope that good news keeps coming in. In terms of what's been covered so far, I'm not going to focus too much on Israeli-Palestinian dynamics, because I think that's already been done. I want to look more, look outwards, shift outwards on the changing regional dynamics, the regional balance of power, and how that might shape the quote unquote day after, not just in Gaza, but the broader Middle East. Just to start things off, Avi covered it very, very well, but I would categorize Israel's grand strategy before October the 7th as that of a status quo power. Okay, what I mean by a status quo power is that Israel's general approach to things was don't rock the boat. Yes, we have hostiles on our border, but we'd rather have the better the devil you know strategy over chaos and confusion. We'd rather have that over power vacuums. And that really, I think, that's the broader contours of Israel's strategic thinking. It was very, very bad, by the way, if you're a Palestinian in the occupied territories, because it meant that you were kind of locked into this de facto, if not de jure, annexation of the West Bank and contained within Gaza, unable to leave. But it was more or less, it was more positive for the region overall, because it meant that Israel was less likely to use its qualitative military edge to escalate conflict elsewhere. That all changed, as Avi already said, on October the 7th. Israel became what it's often accused Iran of being, a revisionist power devoted to throwing its weight around, using military force, in the words of Netanyahu, to create a new Middle East. So once once the old order is destroyed, to have this new phoenix rise from the ashes. And I think this grand strategy has had some results for Israel in terms of military victories, in terms of, for example, reducing Hezbollah and Hamas to a shell of its former self. Israel took on the Iranian regime, and generally, I think perceptions are more or less commonly shared that it came out of that 12-day conflict better off than Iran did. And of course, its actions have contributed to the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. But what we don't see from Israel is that quote unquote day after plan, not just in Gaza, but elsewhere. That ability to turn short-term military victories into long-term political wins. And I just don't think Israel's interested in doing that. I don't think Netanyahu's interested in doing that. There is this preoccupation and prioritization of military force above all else. And you had that before October the 7th, but Israel was using military force in the Israeli military term, to mow the lawn, to constrain and deter any threats to the regional balance of power, whereas it's now using its military force to uproot the trees, as I say, to basically remove those threats and radically remake the region. But Israel is still coming up short, and I think the greatest example of that recently is Israel's strike in Doha. Now, I probably mentioned that simply through my own bias. I was there. I saw it all happen from my bedroom window. I saw the smoke rising up, and straight away I thought, I know what this is. And obviously that strike was intended to kill the Hamas leadership in Doha. But once again, it was Israel prioritizing military force above all else. There would, of course, been a political pushback. This would have contributed to Israel's ongoing deterioration in its global ties. I think it's fair to say now that Israel is a pariah state, and that's unlikely to change anytime soon because of this grand strategic shift. But it didn't have a political horizon. Netanyahu did not have in his mind a way to turn, if that attack had been successful, which it wasn't, into a long-term political gain for Israel. And it shows you, that Doha strike, by the way, just how Israel is undermining itself, because from the Israeli perspective, it was forced to do something as a result that it didn't want to do. You had Netanyahu make that humiliating apology to the Qatari emir in the White House, and then you had Netanyahu, of course, agree to a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. So I think that shows you really what the key implications here of Israel's revisionist grand strategy is. And that's not just, we've talked about a day after in Gaza, but that's not an exception, it's the rule. Israel doesn't think about the day after in Lebanon. It doesn't think about the day after in Syria. It doesn't think about the day after in the West Bank, apart from possibly planning the annexation, the formal annexation of the territory. So that's where Israel's new grand strategy falls short. And this is, of course, a regional crisis. But in every crisis, there is always the chance for opportunity. And I think the people who are the actors that are rising to that opportunity right now are actually the Arab Gulf states. Now, when I was in Qatar, there was this perception that everything has to change. You know, I was talking to every Qatari I spoke to, felt an acute sense of betrayal, not by Israel, but by the US. They were saying, look, we're paying all of this money for these security guarantees, but the US has just thrown us under the bus. But actually, very, very little has changed, right? Qatar did not end its mediation, and the Gulf states didn't pivot elsewhere. Actually, they're doing a pretty good job as Trump whisperers, as people who seem to actually have the ability to get Trump to listen to them and to change policy as a result. We saw that in May of this year when the Saudis and the Qataris got Trump to drop his sanctions against Ahmed al-Shara, the US sanctions against Ahmed al-Shara in Syria. This is something the Israelis didn't want, by the way, and this was a case of the Gulf lobby beating or winning out over the Israel lobby in the struggle for derivative power in Washington. You know, who gets to influence the global hegemon the most. And we're seeing in Syria and Lebanon, it's the Gulf states that are investing billions. You know, they're throwing around a different form of hard power to Israel, whereas Israel's throwing around military force, they're throwing around cash. And that actually might deliver better dividends because of the Gulf states' ability to shape a day after in both of those countries. And I think we're going to see the same thing manifest in Gaza. Israel does not know what it wants from Gaza. It's been like that for a very long time, even before October the 7th. There's a reason why Yitzhak Rabin said, you know, he wishes it would sink into the sea, just because it's kind of a headache and no one really has a solution to that massive headache. So my prediction is we'll see that same trend manifest there in Gaza of Israel kind of muddling along. Do they want to actually withdraw from Gaza and on the agreement? Maybe some Israelis do, maybe some Israelis don't. Many members of the coalition definitely don't. And that's why we're seeing, for example, if you look at right-wing Israeli media, they're saying that, oh yeah, we're hearing from senior government sources that this withdrawal from 80% of the Gaza Strip to 50%, that will be the last withdrawal. You know, we're just doing it to honor Trump, but we're relying on Hamas to basically break the deal before us. And I think that is a very, very short-term approach, obviously, and I don't think it's actually true in this case. One of the differences with this deal is how Trump and others have made the costs of breaking it so high. They baked that in by bringing in so many actors. For example, as Claire alluded to there, Turkey, also the Arab Gulf states, Egypt and Jordan. And we'll see a different dynamic unfold on the ground if this is allowed to continue. We've heard already talk of Emirati troops in the Gaza Strip, Egyptian and Jordanian troops in the Gaza Strip. So it's not just about the Gulf states and the Arab world bankrolling the reconstruction of Gaza. It's also about them providing a boots on the ground presence as well, which is something that Israel will certainly object to. You know, this idea of having foreign troops west of the Jordan River is something that multiple Israeli administrations, Netanyahu aside, have long been averse to. But I'm slightly more pessimistic than Avi because I don't think that I'm skeptical that Israel's grand strategy will change so significantly. You know, October the 7th was such a trauma, such a shock, that it's hard for me to imagine Israel just going back overnight to being a status quo power. I think we'll see Israel still being pretty, a lot more assertive militarily than it was before. You know, not a return to mowing the grass, unfortunately. Obviously, as we also heard, Israel returning to being a status quo power is not great for anyone either, because we need to get to somewhere better. Otherwise, all this violence has been for nothing. But my key takeaway here is that if, and it is a big if, we get to somewhere better, it will be in spite of Israel, not because of it. And it will also, of course, be in spite of Hamas, not because of Hamas. And we're going to keep seeing that changing dynamic of power where it's the Arab Gulf states who are actually going to really be able to capitalize on the current regional war. It's not a war they wanted, it's not a war they backed, but they're in a better position because they're able to exert different forms of statecraft than just throwing their weight around, and they don't have the negative baggage that Israel has. And effectively, while it's constrained and rolled back its adversaries, and many of these adversaries are problematic, it has basically turned itself into a pariah state. And I'll stop there.
Rob, that's very clear and some strong analysis and statements there, which others may well wish to react to. I'm conscious we've got about a quarter of an hour left, and I've already got some questions, which I'm gonna put 3 questions out there, and then turn to Avi and Devine in the first instance to respond, and then we see if there are any more questions before giving everyone a last word. So if I can ask the panelists to be as succinct as possible in their responses. First question, and perhaps directed particularly at Avi, is what exactly do you expect to happen next in Israeli politics? You said that you think there'll be a change of government. What time frame? How do you see that playing out? Secondly, on the Palestinian side, a threat from the released Palestinians, detainees, many of them now back in the West Bank. Can the Palestinian Authority manage to contain, suppress that, and prevent violent action further? Or what role will the Israelis play in containing that threat from the released Palestinian detainees? And then a third question, focus on rule of law. So the questioner stressed that it's needed for long-term security, and particularly how might the rule of law be applied in a Palestinian state. I think we're already seeing Hamas filling a void as the IDF withdraw, and battles with gangs and other illegal groups taking place already in parts of Gaza, which no longer has the IDF in them. But what capacity building in particular might be useful to help both all parties deal with the rule of law in this new situation? So 3 questions there. I'll turn to Avi and Devine first, as I say. Do pick up whichever of you, don't feel you have to answer all of them, but just respond as you feel best. Over to you, Avi, first. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Nicholas. Regarding the government, as I said before, I think that we should expect that following the upcoming elections, whether it's going to take in time, which is about a year from now or before, there will be a change. The major change will be that the Israeli ultranational right wing will not be present in that government. We will witness the going back of the major, I would say, mainline pragmatic Zionist camp, bringing together the major Israeli parties that Zionism is in the center of their ideology, including, of course, Likud. And so I think that will be the shape of the upcoming government. Again, I think that government will reflect to a large extent the newly shaped Israeli consensus, which basically vis-a-vis the issue of the potential path ahead regarding the conflict will be much more, I would say, cautious in context of like the willingness to be generous in making concessions vis-a-vis Palestinians. It goes back to what we said before about the trauma of October 7 and the fact that in the end of the day, you are looking at an inner Palestinian system, and that may relate to your third question, Nicholas, that is very much torn apart. We are looking at an inner Palestinian system that one of its major players, the Hamas movement, is not looking for a solution. Or to be more accurate, his solution is not solution. He actually calls for the elimination of the state of Israel. He's not going to change the ideology. And so this is something that we have to understand, that most of Israelis are looking at saying, well, if this is one of the major Palestinian players, who exactly are we going to talk with? And of course, that was relevant before October 7, let alone, of course, following October 7.
Admirably clear and succinct, Avi. Thank you very much. Devine?
Thank you, Avi. I'll try to be as precise as Avi was. So in general, I think I'm going to start with the question of the Palestinian freed detainees. I'm not sure if anybody who have asked this question, or if the people, the audience on this call, have seen the pictures of the freed Palestinian detainees yesterday, and have seen that they almost look like human skeletons, tortured and beat and starved and sick. And that is the situation of Palestinian detainees right now in Israeli prisons. Again, most of them are there without a proper trial and without a proper investigation. And now that said, if we look at it in the larger context of why, from the first place, do we have Palestinians who are resisting occupation? It's simply because we do have a situation of occupation, and we do have a situation where there is no Palestinian independent state, and people are in a situation where they don't have economic prosperity. They don't have opportunities to get to meet with the other side, the Israelis. There's no humanization process. There is no political horizon. There's no political vision. And the moderates, which is the Palestinian Authority, has been weakened throughout the years by the Israeli regime and the occupation regime. So that's it. If we want to keep the detainees from terrorizing Israel again, the best way forward is to find a political solution, is to provide a political vision, is to empower the moderates, and for us as Palestinians to give us opportunities to select our own leaders who actually sit in Israeli jails right now. According to the polls, one way to get rid of Hamas so that they don't control us anymore is through elections and through having Marwan Barghouti run for elections as well. Marwan Barghouti, we all know, is in Israeli jails right now. So there are ways to kind of not only for the Israelis to feel secure, but also for the Palestinians to feel secure as well. And that path is very clear. It's a political vision. It's a two-state solution. It's empowering the moderate. It comes with a regional perspective, and it also needs to come with economic prosperity for both people as well.
Thank you very much, Naveen. That's very clear. I've got a further question, and then I'm going to loop. This one's for Rob, and then I'm going to loop back to Claire for any reflections on anything she's heard in this round. Rob, a question asking, pointing out actually very much based on your comment that any Israeli day after plan would surely be immediately rejected because it was made in Israel. Therefore, shouldn't to have any chance of success, surely the day after plan needs to come from the Arabs. That's the question. Would you like to react to that one?
Yeah, well, I think there are you're right. Anything coming from Israel would definitely be controversial, to say the least, in the region. But there are many easy ways around this. You know, in previous peace summits and mediations, we've had the Israelis pass the US proposals, which the US then sell to the Arabs as their own proposals. But the key problem here is not that an Israeli proposal comes from Israel. It's that an Israeli proposal for a day after hasn't come from Israel. This is something the Biden administration pushed the Israelis for right at the start of the Gaza offensive, saying, okay, look, yes, we know you need to and want to retaliate, but don't make the same mistake as we did in Iraq and Afghanistan, or you did in southern Lebanon or elsewhere, and basically just think you can throw your military weight around and then a solution will present itself. You have to have an off-ramp. You need to use war for the continuation of politics as a means, to quote Clausewitz. The Israelis didn't do that, neither privately to the Americans nor publicly. This is something they steadfastly refused to do. And indeed, that there were other Arab initiatives for a day after. We know that, for example, the Gulf states, the UAE, presented Israel with Saudi backing, various offers of a UAE role in Gaza, which Israel steadfastly rejected before. It took their ill thought out and failed strike in Doha to force Netanyahu's hand to get him to agree to things that he's rejected in the past. And, you know, on this subject of Gaza, Israel could have worked to, as the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said before he was sacked, could have worked to cultivate actors within the Gaza Strip who could be an alternative power source to Hamas. Israel didn't do that. It was only interested in furthering chaos in the Gaza Strip. The closest it came to was working with people like Yasser Abu Shabab, who is a career criminal who was already in jail for drug trafficking before October the 7th. Netanyahu claimed that this is the alternative to Hamas. Yasser Abu Shabab and his other contemporaries are not an alternative to chaos. They thrive on chaos. And I think, again, that really shows you how Israel deliberately did not have a day after plan in Gaza. They were quite happy to just create and further chaos on the ground. Nicholas, you're muted, sorry.
Sorry, just muted
Thanks, Rob.
yourself.
I was just saying, very helpful response. I get the sense we could debate these points, many of these individual points, for an hour in each, and go on all day, which hopefully others will continue to discuss and move us forward. But thank you for that response, Rob. I've actually got, before Claire comes in with any last thoughts on this, and then I will give very briefly the opportunity to all the other three panelists to say one last thing before we wrap. But Claire, there's a question for you, that you emphasize the importance of not letting the unacceptable become acceptable. And what specific steps should the UK and EU take right now to ensure moral accountability is restored in the peace process? Now we're counting down. We've got less than 5 minutes. So if you can be as brief as possible.
I think actually talking in terms, I mean, for the West to actually talk in terms of a moral compass being reset and admitting as a demonstration effect their own failures. And I'm thinking I can talk particularly of the UK, where I think the distinction between criticisms of the Israeli government being equated with anti-Semitism, I think has been disastrous for the rise of anti-Semitism in this country. And I think there should be distinctions made between actions by specific people coupled with the alternatives that they might like to embrace. So, you know, we're not in a very strong position, because I think collectively, you know, we failed all sides on this. But I do think stopping the zero-sum game thinking and actually being aware that in the short term, to get anything done, you're going to have to appeal to, first and foremost, Donald Trump himself, and secondly, because he's now off to fix Ukraine, so we're told, to the envoys and this little team he's got now in the follow-up, actually make things appealing to them, because it seems to me it all hinges on whether Trump and the US carry on exerting a bit of leverage over Israel. Everything that Rob said could happen, but if the US continues to exert the kind of leverage and issue the kind of behind-the-scenes threats of stopping armaments, etc., Israel's going to be constrained, whoever's running Israel, I mean, in what they can actually do in terms of strategy. So I think there's a lot of this will go on behind the scenes, a lot of it front of house. And I just want to pay credit to, you know, one of the reasons Trump focused attention on the hostages, which he didn't do for a very long time, was that banner in Hostage Square, which said, it's now or never. They were very, very strategically and tactically astute and very committed, the hostage families and their supporters, in actually getting results. And I think we're, you know, in a parallel universe, when it comes to economics, when it comes to education, when it comes to including Palestinians of a broader hue than those we've seen, that kind of short, sharp, intelligent interventions that will appeal to Trump and that can actually be operated on with the right kind of leverage is what's been missing until now, and we need to have more of. And finally, I'm sorry to say, Naveen, Marwan Barghouti is just unpalatable for the Israelis. Whether he has a symbolic role, that could be a way forward, but we do need a younger generation taking over on the Palestinian side. They are the most educated people, often we are told, in the region, despite everything they've been through. There are extremely intelligent, clever, adept Palestinians and also within the diaspora communities that can help. And I think that's where we need to be heading, not back to the past and not back to the Palestinian Authority as it has been.
Thank you, Claire. I'm going to go to Avi first, then Rob, and give Naveen the last word. As brief as possible, please. Avi.
Shortly, I will focus my message to the Western public opinion and audience. What happened following October 7 revealed a staggering but not surprising lack of knowledge and understanding, lack of context, lack of facts and understanding of the ins and outs. And so I think there is an urgent need for the Western fabric, not only for the sake of the Israeli and Palestinians. There is an urgent need for a real education that basically offers all those things that are absent, namely facts, context, understanding of the players involved, and so on and so on. And this is exactly what our institute is doing inside the Middle East ITME. By doing that, we are enabling and enhancing the ability of people with good intentions across the world to contribute to a positive trajectory of the Israelis and Palestinians. This is my major message.
That's a great message, and I would echo that. The MEA, like your institute, is also very much focused on this kind of educating and helping people understand better to come to more mature conclusions and actions. Rob.
Yes, so just very quickly, Avi rightly mentioned, Hamas is a rejectionist, problematic actor, and he's absolutely right. But I think it's fair to say that they might not be out, but Hamas is certainly down. They have been dealt a severe blow, not just in terms of their capabilities, but in terms of Palestinian public opinion and support for Hamas. So that's kind of on one side, one problematic actor is in deep trouble. However, on the other side, the other problematic actor is the Israeli government, the Israeli far right. They are still in government, and just as Hamas wants to destroy Israel, they want to destroy any sort of chance of a Palestinian state and even the notion of a Palestinian people. They are still in government. Many of them have voted against the agreement but haven't left it yet. They will do everything in their power to scupper it, just like Hamas will. But currently, they're the ones who are not down and certainly not out. They know that their political future depends on ruining this agreement. And as we also know, Trump has a very, very short attention span. He's likely to focus elsewhere and wander off. That's why we need continued international pressure to make sure neither side scuppers this deal.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, next stop, Ukraine, Venezuela. The Trump tour goes on. Very clear. Thank you. And the last word to Naveen, please.
Thank you. So the title of this panel has been Shifting Attitudes as well. And I think for me, how do you shift attitudes is first of all by providing a political horizon and a political roadmap for us for both Palestinians and Israelis, that there is a path forward. We need to build on the recognition that has been a win for the Palestinians, but also what it means for Israelis as well. And definitely the path towards shifting attitudes is through civil society. And we all know that civil society not only shifts attitudes and narratives, but they also have the capacity to build on the communities, and also they basically can create the political context and the circumstances that are needed to hold such political agreements as well. To that final point, I fully agree with you, Claire. I'm a Palestinian myself. I do consider myself to be a leader in my community, but I also want my community to know that I am there and to get their attitudes to change as well. And unfortunately, until now, we did not have the opportunity for any emerging leader to lead in Palestine because of the different circumstances, the first and foremost being occupation. Therefore, until today, all the polls show that Marwan Barghouti is number one. I'm not advocating for anybody here, but I'm just saying what the polling is saying. And once we support civil society to shift the attitudes, I'm pretty sure these polling are also going to change as well. And thank you again for the opportunity.
Well, thank you, Naveen, and thank you to all our panelists. We've run just over 5 minutes over scheduled time, but I'm sure all those online will forgive us because it's been a fascinating discussion. It feels like we're doing it at the right time, and hopefully there will be many other discussions similar happening around the world, and particularly in the region itself, on how to move forward. And let us hope that some of the points that have been made today land and are explored to bring a better future for the Israelis, the Palestinians, and all in the region. Just remains for me to thank you on behalf of the Middle East Association. Thank you all for joining online. We've had a good turnout today. Really great to see that. Thank you again to the panelists who have given us their time and insights. If any of you are not aware of the Middle East Association's activities, do look at our website. And please also consider attending others of our events. We've got a gala dinner coming up on the 27th of November and a range of other enjoyable and also intellectually stimulating and politically important activities programmed. Hope to see you at some of those. Thank you again for joining us today. Goodbye.
Thank you. Hello and goodbye. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.